So questions kind of come up of making these intervals and why we use the process we do. We're at week 2 at this point. Should have watched already the videos for creating intervals and also possibly the quick interval video at this point. So the idea here is, if we have red and we want to go to say cyan, which is hue 180, why can't we, as we did with the color wheel, just count off our steps and just do changes about 30 degrees. So I'm going to go, let's go the way you would expect. So 30 degrees here, 60 here, 90. And why don't we call this a smooth transition? And it's a fair question, and part of why is what we're seeing in those RGB values that's been discussed. Another reason is how colors would naturally mix. So we're talking about mixing these two in a direct line. We're not talking about creating color wheel, which was different. So it's about context in this case. So we have our parent colors, and we're trying to create intermediate steps to go between these. In this case, we're looking at a color wheel, and it's going out and around. It's not really a direct line between these two. And now, what happens when we kind of let's do the process shown? If we bring down the cyan, and some of you kind of realize where this is going if you're familiar with complements, and basically what happens is we're going to have a complement mix here. So if you know what that means, you know what's about to happen. So starting off here, we're going to pick up the next parent color. We're going to paint bucket. I'm not going to count off the opacities because at this point I've probably done it. You've probably heard it. So I think you're fine with that. And you're seeing that it's not going to orange. It's not going around the color wheel. Because if this was correct, then why wouldn't it have been correct to go through magenta? And so let's do, before we move ahead, let's consider that alternative. So let's drop that in here at the bottom, and let's go 30 degrees the other way. And then we end up with a situation where we're two correct answers, and that can happen in many cases. But the idea between the parent colors and creating intermediate steps in between is that you have this direct line of color, and that's why we're using those RGB values. So now you have a situation where you have these two correct, but where would be your solution to it? And I think that's what the process is correcting. And so so hopefully this begins to, excuse me there, what did I hit? I hit, yep. I picked somebody up. I shouldn't have. So the process is correcting that issue. So we go back to our parent color. We go to our second transitional step here, and then we see I see my previous opacity, and just keep kind of going along and changing that. In the middle one's 50 because that's the easy one. And notice complements create gray when they're mixed. And so that's what's happening, is that we're mixing these two. In this case, we're not really mixing these two. We're going around in a very different way of creating a gradation. It's still a gradation, but that's not really the point of creating intermediate steps between. And I think that's something that needs to be considered between gradation and interval. And if that maybe is the case, if it's a simple solution of terminology, maybe hopefully that solves everything. I don't know that it's going to be that simple, but what we'll see here, though, in the RGB values is we're going to see cyan is going to be made up of equal parts green and blue. Those are going to decrease at the same amount that the red is increasing. So we're seeing 43 unit decreases in those RGB values, and then it's increasing the red. And so that's part of what happens with complements. They're kind of a unique situation when we get to transparency and to harmonies, is because they have a lot of flexibility because of the way they don't introduce new hues, but also the ways they're mixing. We'll talk about that more, but I want to point out these differences here and in these three different scenarios to the same question, depending on how you consider the context. And the context in this case is that we're thinking about the parent colors, and we want to have a direct line between the two of them. So if we go, a line tool here, we want to go directly from one to the other. We don't want to go in between or around, because if we're going in any direction, then our stops in between can be like a bus route. We want to go from point A to point B in the most direct route possible, and that's the difference here between the interval and the gradation. The gradation can go in any direction we want it to, and it's a matter of what we need, but the interval is a direct route.